Hello, everyone. My name is Tom, and this is the Trans Life Podcast. And hopefully, at this point, I have some cool music playing, but if I don't, sorry. So, it occurs to me that recording in the kitchen may not have been my best choice because it is a little bit echoey in here. But hopefully it will not be so echoey that you will not be able to enjoy this lovely first podcast. So what is the Trans Life Podcast? Who am I? What am I doing here? What is going on? Where am I? Who am I? Etc. So if you are not familiar with me, my name is Tom, as I already said cleverly at the beginning in my intro, and I am a queer trans man, and I am an author, which sounds a little pretentious to say, but, it's true. I write books. I've had 3 books published so far, and I have 2 more that are going to come out this year, queer young adult books. You should check them out. But this is not meant to be an advertisement for my books, although if you want it to be, it could be. But yeah, the point of this podcast is that, as I mentioned, I am a trans guy, but I'm a trans guy who realized I was trans quite late in life. And there's a lot about that I want to talk about. So the point of this podcast is to talk about my life as a trans guy, talk about how I realized and struggles and challenges and joys and just anything related to the topic of being trans, which obviously is not my entire identity, but, it's not something that I get to talk about a lot. It's also the morning, so I have morning phlegm, so please enjoy my morning phlegm. Just kidding, you don't have to, but if you want to, that's fine. So for this first episode, this maiden voyage, which is needlessly gendered, what is the quote unquote masculine form of maiden? This gentlemanly voyage. No, because maiden, I don't know. Let's not talk about etymology right now. So for this first episode of the Trans Life Podcast, I thought we would talk about something pretty foundational, which is the moment of realization, the how did you know kind of thing, which for many trans people happens when they're quite young. There are some people who, literally they're 3 years old and telling their parents like, oh, I'm not a girl, I'm a boy, or I'm not a boy, I'm a girl, or something like that. And I think that's the kind of person who most non-transgender people, which we refer to as cisgender, which no, Elon Musk, it is not a slur, thank you. It is Latin, and it is a perfectly normal thing to say. But yeah, so for a lot of people who are not trans, who are just kind of existing outside of the world of trans knowledge, those are the kind of people they think of. I think when most people think about trans people, they imagine a trans woman, first of all. Trans guys are notoriously overlooked as a species, especially when it comes to weird bathroom rules. Because, when you're like, trans people should go into the bathroom aligned with their birth gender, no one's thinking about the fact that, you're gonna have these buff dudes with mustaches having to go into the ladies' room. But I digress. But yeah, I think when most people think of trans people, they think of a trans woman, and they think of someone who, from the moment they emerged from the womb, they were declaring their transness. And in some cases, that is true. But there are a lot of us who didn't realize until later, because social conditioning is a real thing, and it's very difficult to combat sometimes. And for me, so I grew up in a very small town, very small conservative town in Western Pennsylvania. Largely Christian, 99.9% white population. Everybody knew each other in my school. And, being gay was not even a thing people talked about, let alone being trans. So, I was raised not knowing that I had any other option than being a straight girl? So there are signs, like when I've been decluttering my house because I need to and want to downsize, uh, in order to be able to afford food. So I've been going through a lot of old stuff, like old diaries and pictures and things like that. And, there are definitely signs in my childhood that I never felt quite entirely comfortable being a quote unquote girl. Like, I was referred to as a tomboy a lot, but, it's kind of silly anyway to assign certain behaviors to boys versus girls, being like, girls want to sit pretty in dresses and play dress up, and boys want to go out and play and run and climb trees. So, I loved running and climbing, and like, I was always playing Star Wars, and I wanted to be Luke Skywalker. When I was 11, that was my deepest goal. I used to walk around wearing like my black winter boots and a glove on one hand to be Luke Skywalker, and like using my friends and I would lightsaber duel with curtain rods, which, did not end well for the curtain rods. But in any case, the point is there were a lot of things that I did when I was a kid that could be categorized as being signs, things like, oh, this is not a girl, this is a trans boy. But I also liked a lot of the stereotypically feminine stuff too. I played with Barbies, I liked She-Ra, which, was kind of kick-ass. But, I liked a lot of stereotypically feminine things as well. So I don't think it's really fair that we categorize toys and we categorize activities into male and female. So I don't necessarily consider that proof, so to speak. But in any case, the first time that I really had a moment that I would categorize as a sign, capital letters, is when puberty hit. And for most trans people, puberty is a freaking nightmare. It is a nightmare for everyone, but especially for trans people. So I vividly remember being 11 or 12 or however old I was when things started to develop in the chest area, and just being horrified and like every night like pushing down on my chest with both hands and adding into my prayers, please make these go away. Like they just felt so wrong from moment one. And as I got older, I was kind of taught that no, these are good. These make men interested in you. And so I kind of just dealt with them, but they always felt a little like, why, why must these be attached to me? I would say up to puberty, I was very kind of an androgynous kid. I had really short hair. I was always running around and playing and doing like, I had two brothers, so I'm sure people were just like, oh, that's why. But I was the leader. Like so I have two younger brothers, and the middle brother was always a bit more sensitive. To the point that like my parents were always concerned, like he's crying at the Flintstones meet the Jetsons. Is there something wrong? Is he gay? Kind of thing. But I was the one who like I got in trouble for wrestling my male cousin, and because like okay, let me just divert for a second here. So I was 11 or 12, and he was like a year or two younger than me. And like he's like a big guy. Like he's a big, bulky guy, even back then. So we were evenly matched, and he was definitely heavier than I was. And he's like, girls can't wrestle. Girls could never beat a guy. So I'm like, okay, let's wrestle. And I won, and he got hurt. And our parents came in, and he was crying, and I got in big trouble. But like, come on. Come on. Yeah. Anyway, so after puberty, like when I got into high school, or even just, we technically didn't have a junior high school because 7th through 12th was all in one high school unit. But once I got into high school, there was all this social pressure to look a certain way and behave a certain way and like stop running and playing and jumping and climbing and, doing all the fun stuff that I love to do. So, yeah, so once I got into high school, there was all this pressure to conform. And so I started dressing like I thought I was supposed to dress. I started wearing makeup. I did all the stuff that you're quote unquote supposed to do as a teenage girl. It was also kind of funny because I was conforming to society's expectations of a teenage girl by wearing the right clothes and, doing my hair and doing my makeup and things like that. But I also had this side life where I would go through phases of idolizing guys from movies or TV shows I liked and trying to be like them and talk like them and become them as much as I could. So I'll give you an example. There was Wesley Crusher from Star Trek. I already told you Luke Skywalker, though that was slightly before this. Johnny from The Outsiders, who I thought was so cool. To the extent that I even tried smoking for the first time and then was like, no, this is gross, let's not do this. There was Elijah Wood at some point. There were just a lot of young guys who I thought were so cool. Oh, and also Joey from Toy Soldiers, who was also played by Will Wheaton. So we had double Will Wheaton going on in there. I liked Will Wheaton a lot when I was a kid. I always felt this sense of longing and attraction towards a certain type of guy in movies and TV shows. And I called it a crush. But I never wanted to kiss them or be with them. I never imagined us together. It was more that I wanted to be them. So, but somehow that completely, that did not occur to me at all. So from the surface, these all looked like, here is a straight cis girl who is crushing on these cute young boys. But actually, here is a trans guy who is longing to be able to express himself in the same way that these guys are able to. Yeah, so there were little signs as I was growing up, but it wasn't until... Oh, hi, Darla. Hi, hello. I'm talking to the podcast audience, my dear. But yeah, it wasn't until I got to college... Wow, yeah. It wasn't until I got to college that things finally started to fall apart for me, my carefully constructed aura of heterosexuality and cisgenderness. So once I got to college, everything changed. So as I said, I grew up in a small town in Western Pennsylvania, and I went to college in Pittsburgh, which was 2 hours away from my hometown. So it was far enough away that I couldn't just go home every weekend. And I don't even know why this happened, but for some reason there was not room for me in the freshman dorms. So I was put in a dorm with a sophomore, hell and gone from everybody else, way down at the edge of campus. And my roommate was not the friendliest. She wasn't unfriendly, but there was nothing there. We didn't click, we didn't talk. And she ended up moving in with her boyfriend midway through the term. So essentially I was all by myself, had made no friends because, I'm rather shy and introverted. And if I had roomed with another freshman or been in a place where I could go to freshman events and things like that, it might have been different, but it wasn't. So I was alone. I was keeping really unhealthy hours, staying up all night, missing classes and things like that. It was not good. This was also when I had my first instance of anxiety and depression starting, which was super fun. But one of the big things that I was struggling with was my sexuality. And part and parcel with that was my gender identity, which I can't even remember when I started to suspect that I might be trans. I can't remember that light bulb moment. But I do remember realizing that I was interested in girls. Darla, my God. But I do remember realizing that I was into girls after watching, it was the middle of the night and I had the TV on in the background and, there were girls in bikinis and I was not uninterested, let's just say that. And I was like, oh crap, I think I like girls. And at some point around there, I started to figure out that I might feel more comfortable as a guy. So one thing I do remember is that I had a composition class as a freshman. And one of the things we read was called something like, it was an essay called something like The Marked Woman. And it was all about how, in business, for example, men were kind of like their appearance was not really considered. Like they could show up in a suit and a tie every day and it was fine. But for a woman, whatever she wore, it was a statement. It meant something. If she wore a business suit, it meant this. If she wore a dress, it meant this. If she wore this or that or that. The point was that whatever a woman wore, she was judged on her appearance so much more than men. And I started thinking about that. And for some reason, that just triggered something in me. And from then on, I started slowly scaling into, like, I cut my hair and I started wearing more quote unquote masculine clothes and like wearing a cap around and things like that, wearing a baseball cap around. I think one of the reasons why it took me so long to realize that how I was feeling was legitimate was the fact that when I presented femininely, I got a lot of unwelcome attention from men. I got catcalled on the streets all the time. And like once I was walking back to my dorm and some freaking guy like smacked my ass as I walked past him, which was incredibly humiliating and awful and just made me feel terrible for the rest of the day. So, don't do that. if you are a guy or if you are anyone, just don't do that. Yeah, so for the longest time I was like, well, do I just want to not receive this attention from creepy guys on the street? And of course the answer is no, I did not want that. I don't think anybody wants that. There might be some who do, and if so, you do you. But in general, I think most women do not want the attention of creepy dudes on the street. But, because of that, it took me a while to figure out that how I was feeling was real and was legitimate. It got to the point where I was pretty sure I was trans, to the extent that, like, I was in the video store, which this was back in the day when video stores were a thing, and I saw the video, Boys Don't Cry, starring Hilary Swank, which if you have not seen it, do not see it. Don't do it. Don't do it to yourself, unless you want to be traumatized, which I was. So if you're not familiar with it, I've talked about this before, over on my YouTube channel, but if you're not familiar, it is the true story of a young trans man in a southern state. I always forget which one. It's kind of, it's a nice story up until the point where he's raped and murdered at the end. So spoilers, but it's a real event, so, can't really spoil that. But yeah, so I watched that, and like through the whole thing, I was just feeling just more and more like everything I was seeing was me. I was like, this is me, this is me, this is 100%, 1000% me. I just related to everything, and it shored up everything I'd been thinking about myself. And then it got to the end, and it was horrible. And I remember taking the tape out of the player and putting it into the bottom of my drawer and covering it with clothes and being like, well, guess I'm not going to be trans then. So like that seriously set me back in my journey because it's terrifying. It's scary. And I mean, the idea of coming out as trans is terrifying anyway, because there's this feeling of unmaking your entire life, of, telling people who you thought I was is not who I actually am. And will they accept you? Will they treat you differently? And stuff like that. So, but again, that's a whole other episode. But in any case, so there was the Boys Don't Cry incident, which did set me back quite a bit in my journey and had me determined to be a straight cis girl for a while. But, after a while, like I moved back home. I ended up transferring to the branch campus so I could live at home. And overall, that turned out to be a good decision. But it also meant that I was back under my mother's roof. And my mom has been wonderful about me being trans. But back then, it wasn't really a thing that people knew. And she put a lot of pressure on me to conform to what society thought a girl should be. And so, like I wasn't allowed to go to my younger brother's graduation because I wanted to wear pants, for example. Or like she threatened me with grounding or something if I didn't let her wax my eyebrows and shit like that. And so it was really difficult for me. And I did end up coming out to her as queer during that time, which was kind of traumatizing as well. We don't need to talk about that right now. But the trans stuff, I really think like at that time, if there had been more resources available for me, if there had been the kind of videos and memoirs and overall sense of it's okay to be trans that exists now, I think it would have gone very differently. I think I would have transitioned back then when I was 19, 20 years old. But as it was, there was nothing like that. And I had all this pressure from my mom and society, let's be real, to not be trans and to act like a girl should, big quotation marks. So I did. And, I did, after college, I moved to Chicago. I moved in with a friend, and like, I was still very much leaning in the quote unquote masculine direction of my gender expression. But then I moved to Japan, and Japan was like high school all over again, where there's a lot of pressure to conform in Japanese society. Individuality is not prized so much as the group and working together and stuff like that, which is great in a lot of ways, but it does tend to take its toll on individual expression. So while I was there, I went super femme, like the femmest I have ever been. Skirts and makeup and false eyelashes. And interestingly enough, the celebrity I was most obsessed with while I was living in Japan was Haruna Ai, who, if you don't know, is a trans woman who is quite famous in Japan, or at least was when I was there 10 years ago, and was all over the talk shows, and like just a very cool lady. She won some beauty competition as well, like in the world, which was cool. But yeah, so like even I was trying to emulate her in my femininity. So I think it's kind of funny that like as a trans guy trying to conform to feminine expectations, my role model was a trans woman. So like I couldn't get away from the trans stuff, even if it was on a subconscious level. But anyway, so I think a lot of these steps in my journey are things that I could talk about in greater detail, like, the situation in Japan and childhood and teenagerdom and all that. But I just wanted to give kind of a basic Cliff's Notes version of my journey of discovery. So essentially, like, and I've taken you up to Japan. So like after I came back from Japan, I slowly started moving back towards more of a center for me. And I started calling myself gender fluid because, I was willing to admit that there was something about me that was not strictly cisgender. And then it took me a while longer, quite a bit longer, before, during the pandemic, of course, I finally had the realization that no, actually I'm a trans guy. In any case, okay, so that's gonna do it for the first episode of the Tom Rambles About Trans Stuff podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, if there's anything that you would like to hear me talk about in the future, or anything you'd like, that's the same thing. Anything you'd like me to talk about, yeah. So if there's anything you'd like me to talk about, or any questions you have or things like that, feel free to let me know. I also have a Patreon, which you can join if you would like to get early access to these podcasts, as well as my YouTube videos and daily pictures of my cats. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for listening to me babble, and I hope I will have another episode for you soon. All right, bye.